The tradition of Festivus begins with the airing of grievances. I got a lot of problems with you people. Now, you're gonna hear about it. You, Kruger, my son tells me your company stinks.
Oh, God.
Quiet, you'll get yours in a minute.
Since Resident Evil 7's release in 2017, the series has been enjoying something of a second golden age, confidently weaving classic and contemporary design sensibilities together. I've appreciated each game to varying degrees, and consider them mostly of a piece with those original titles. Unfortunately, despite everything going for it, Requiem has left me more frustrated than any other recent entry.
No.
While I do have my grievances, there's also plenty to praise. The game made a fantastic first impression. I love the premise of an FBI agent as a Resident Evil protagonist. That background dovetails nicely with the survival horror gameplay loop of slowly piecing together a story from scattered documents, inspecting items, and generally solving puzzles. The performances go such a long way toward elevating this material. Angela Santalbano delivers superb voice and motion capture work, cementing Grace as one of the best new Resident Evil characters in decades. A few emotional beats land almost exclusively due to her work. It's also rewarding to watch her performance evolve accordingly as Grace becomes more confident throughout the story. Nick Apostolidis continues to do an excellent job as Leon. Of course, he's a one-liner machine as ever.
I think I want a second opinion.
But I especially appreciated the few tender moments which really sold Leon's ability to comfort others in dire situations.
Hey, look at me. We're gonna be okay. Yeah?
You get the sense that Leon genuinely cares so much about others and consistently puts their well-being before his own, which really feels earned after what we've seen him go through over these past few games. The only other noteworthy performance is by Anthony Byrne, who plays Victor Gideon. As a villain, Victor honestly feels painfully underutilized, but the delivery makes him so much more charismatic than he has any right to be. While he's clearly a delusional megalomaniac, his tone often has this disarmingly gentle quality, which even betrays what feels like a strange hint of sexual tension around Leon.
Why are you here? Is it for me? Or for her?
Maybe I'm reaching here, but the performance consistently reminded me of Brian Cox as Hannibal Lecter, which is pretty high praise for a character that ultimately doesn't amount to much at all. The first lengthy chunk of proper gameplay takes place in Rhodes Hill Chronic Care Center, which may be among my absolute favorite Resident Evil environments. Here, Grace is mainly tasked with finding 3 quartz cubes in order to unlock the facility's courtyard door and escape. Obviously, this is easier said than done, cascading into a far more convoluted hunt for other keys, ID bands, and trinkets, all left in the worst possible places. More than anything else, what makes this hospital such a delight to explore is its wild cast of infected staff and patients. I think it's worth noting that Requiem's director Koshi Nakanishi also helmed Resident Evil 7, which explains a lot. Almost every zombie here oozes so much personality, among other things. Very reminiscent of the Baker family in that game. They all managed to simultaneously be terrifying and hilarious.
The right lung has lost all common sense.
Zombies have also rarely felt this dynamic in any other Resident Evil title. There are plenty of clever ways to manipulate them based on their unique behavior so that you can more safely get around. You can even turn them against each other, which is a treat. Blister heads lend another awesome dimension to these zombies. Much like Crimson Heads from the Resident Evil 1 remake, standard zombies who were killed but still technically have intact heads can resurrect in this hyper-feral state. Their introduction really serves to dramatically spike the tension again, just as you've probably started feeling more at ease while exploring. Requiem also easily has my favorite stalker enemies since Mr. X, coming in a variety of flavors. It's not long after waking up in Rhodes Hill before Grace first encounters the girl, an enormous creature who loves chomping on heads and can only be meaningfully evaded by taking advantage of her weakness to light. Luckily, she isn't omnipresent to an annoying degree as Mr. X could sometimes be in RE2 Remake, only becoming a factor again once you reach the basement. The chef and Chunk sort of take her place for a while, each putting a different spin on that stalker concept while patrolling their respective hospital wings. Chunk in particular is a banger of an idea. I so heavily associate him with everything that makes this game uniquely charming.
Good God, they're making them big nowadays. Well, they notice gas crunch on. Look at the size of you.
In Rhodes Hill, we're also introduced to Requiem's spin on crafting, using a new item called the Blood Collector. With this tool, infected blood becomes an essential ingredient for all craftable items, which crucially means that you do have a real incentive to kill enemies beyond just removing them as an obstacle. Now, I was admittedly worried that this might tilt the scales too heavily in favor of an action-oriented approach. There's a reason, after all, that the classic RE games never rewarded you with drops for taking out zombies, by and large anyway. Doing so just eliminated a threat, but was almost always a net negative in terms of your available resources. There's still plenty of reason not to kill most enemies as Grace though. For one, they're so aggressive, tanky, and unpredictable once alerted to your presence, that stealthily skirting by them often remains the path of least resistance. Killing any enemy carelessly also runs the risk that they'll turn into blister heads. The only consistently guaranteed way to dispatch a zombie permanently as Grace is by using a hemolytic injector, which costs you a lot of blood and generally doesn't even work unless approaching them from behind. So while you have incentive to remove enemies from the playing field, doing so can be expensive and often doesn't yield much reward at all. Another fun wrinkle of blood crafting is that it allows Grace to make her own ink ribbons. For that reason, I actually consider this the best implementation of mandatory ink ribbons in any modern Resident Evil title. Of course, there are technically sufficient ink ribbons scattered throughout the environment to make do with, though making them a craftable item affords players so much more flexibility during their run, while still rendering the choice to save your game a truly strategic one. Saving on a near constant basis becomes entirely possible, but doing this too often would limit your blood supply for crafting crucial tools like the hemolytic injector and Requiem bullets. On that note, Requiem ties Grace's kit together so well, giving her immense firepower which can even blow through multiple zombies at once. There are few things more satisfying in the game. You only find an incredibly limited amount of bullets for it though, and while Requiem ammo is craftable, supplies are often much better spent on making other tools. I especially love that some items, which seem useless at first, actually have tremendous value, once you've learned how to properly take advantage of them anyway. Knives and glass bottles are the best examples. Despite doing no actual damage, glass bottles are low-key overpowered. Not only does throwing these serve as a distraction to kite enemies around, but they also instantly stagger any normal zombie. The utility of that really can't be overstated in a game where multiple bullets to the head often still doesn't stun a zombie. For my first playthrough, knives struck me as straight up terrible at anything other than mitigating damage after getting grabbed, which isn't even possible if you're attacked from behind anyway. Though once you get a charm which boosts their damage output by a huge amount, they suddenly become incredible. Insanity difficulty also introduces a unique variant called the RIP knife, which when paired with this charm absolutely shreds zombies. It's not always a foolproof solution by any means, but can situationally be the most resource-efficient way to take care of zombies. For all of these reasons, I was just enraptured while playing as Grace. Her wheel of options is just varied enough while not letting any single tool or tactic become overwhelmingly effective. So you're always cycling through these compelling little choices which feel deeply consequential about crafting, who to kill, and which route through the care center is safest. Particularly on Insanity difficulty, it's some of the best survival horror gameplay I've personally enjoyed in years.
It's like a giant puzzle box.
Unfortunately, the transitions between Grace and Leon are handled less elegantly than I would have liked. I can definitely see what they were going for with the initial setup, and for a while it works well enough. Leon's sections are clearly designed around providing a brief, tension-releasing power fantasy to punctuate Grace's much more nerve-wracking gameplay, though there are some odd inconsistencies which make the split more jarring than it should be, like Leon apparently forgetting how to use typewriters. That sounds like a joke, but seriously, I was pretty annoyed and not even having the choice to make any manual saves when playing as Leon in Rhodes Hill. This is made doubly frustrating by how little time the game even gives us to get acquainted with Leon's mechanics early on. That turned out to kind of be a blessing in disguise, though. Spending more time with Leon only reveals his gameplay to be fairly anemic, given an honestly shocking dearth of enemy variety and how consistently effective some pretty basic tactics remain throughout. The prime example is that every zombie can easily be knocked down with 1 or 2 shotgun shells to their legs, which pretty much always yields an execution prompt. For huge swaths of the game, this pretty much negates all incentive to use any other guns. Blisterheads, and especially the Blister-born sub-bosses, seem designed to address this, but they really aren't utilized nearly enough. In most normal Leon encounters, the aforementioned shotgun blast their legs approach is always far too effective at preventing zombies from ever becoming blisterheads at all. Meanwhile, the Blisterborn is actually a fantastic enemy design, as it synergizes so well with this blisterhead mechanic. They can only be damaged by destroying their yellow, pulsating tumors, which release clouds of infected blood and instantly turn any intact zombies nearby into blisterheads. This forces you to either somehow meticulously ensure that every nearby zombie is decapitated before engaging the Blisterborn directly, or juggle multiple fast and tanky enemies at once, especially considering how enclosed the arenas in which you fight them are. Encounters with these enemies facilitate a genuinely thrilling and proactive type of gameplay. Unfortunately, there are only 2 of them throughout the entire game, which feels like a colossal shame. There's just a puzzling lack of compelling enemy permutations, or the variety necessary to even allow for them. Otherwise, blisterheads simply don't appear with enough frequency that they pose any real threat once you reach Raccoon City. By this point, I think Capcom could have easily justified replacing pretty much all standard zombies with them, as Leon is overpowered enough to warrant the extra challenge. You'd think that these chainsaw-wielding zombies should add at least a little spice to combat, but there are just 2 encounters featuring them in all of Raccoon City. At the gas station, this special variant wearing armor only spawns in after you've killed every other zombie, making him kind of trivial to deal with. In both RE4 and its remake, chainsaw-wielding Ganado were uniquely threatening because you often had to juggle them simultaneously with plenty of normal enemies. Here, there's nothing stopping the player from creating plenty of space and simply sniping from afar. This renders what should be a dynamic and tense fight a pretty tepid bullet sponge. Oh, there's also another one here which I completely forgot about until it came time to review my footage. You can literally just run past him and he doesn't follow at all. The only other enemies introduced for a while are these BSAA zombies who have submachine guns or fire mortars at you. Some of them are holding grenades too. Not only are these boring thematically, but I personally found them outrageously annoying on my first playthrough. The gun-toting zombies actually don't pose much of a challenge once you know about them. You just need to prioritize putting these guys down immediately once they spawn. Although if you somehow didn't notice that one activated while dealing with other enemies or were just too slow, enjoy taking unavoidable off-screen damage from hit-scan bullets. What a treat! Meanwhile, this mortar section is just excruciating until you figure out exactly which route the game wants and never deviate from it at all. At first, I genuinely had no idea what was even happening here, as the game doesn't really telegraph it effectively. Maybe it's supposed to be some fun surprise. By contrast, RE4 and its remake had enough courtesy to play a short cutscene demonstrating these cannons for players before they could even take damage from them, which feels necessary when introducing a completely unprecedented type of threat. Later, Leon is also made to fight human soldiers with assault rifles, and it just feels terrible. Not sure if this is a hot take, but on principle, I kind of just never want to be fighting what are basically Metal Gear guards in my Resident Evil games. It's just antithetical to what makes this series appealing. Though, even ignoring that gripe, these encounters don't really test any of the skills you've developed throughout Requiem. It just feels like a complete non sequitur. These enemies also struck me as oddly unpolished, featuring stilted and cheap-looking death animations, which often don't play out until many seconds after you've killed them. I'm not sure why, but it also seemed like the game suddenly became prudish about gore once Leon started fighting human enemies, which honestly is a lame cop-out. These melons should be exploding into red mist when I shoot them, infected or not. When the game does finally introduce another enemy type not holding a gun, it's just lickers, which feels like an inadvertent admission that Capcom had run out of ideas by this point. So far as Leon's gameplay generally being pretty dull is concerned, it doesn't help matters that his parry has been made considerably more effective than in the RE4 remake. In that game, it just rewarded players with a melee attack, and only perfect parries worked at all on professional difficulty. Many particularly dangerous attacks like grabs couldn't be parried whatsoever, which was a crucial balancing choice, preventing players from relying on it too heavily. Knives could also completely break, which meant that players lost access to parrying until they had the merchant repair them. In RE9, even on Insanity difficulty, you can still parry almost every single attack, including grabs. Perfect parries now completely incapacitate normal enemies and give you an immediate execution prompt. But there's little incentive to even learn that precise timing when a sloppy input will do just as well, trivializing any zombie's attacks, blisterhead or not. Of course, just as in RE4 Remake, the hatchet durability is meant to balance this, and early on it does so reasonably well. Leon can sharpen his hatchet to repair its durability now, but making room and time for doing that in Rhodes Hill feels tricky at first because the spaces are so tight. Though after even one durability upgrade, this stops being much of a concern altogether, and in Raccoon City, environments become open enough that you can easily retreat to sharpen the hatchet as necessary. This durability and hatchet repair subsystem also has a knock-on effect in certain boss fights. Precisely because you should technically always be able to parry now, Capcom designed at least 3 of the bosses entirely around that mechanic. This can make those battles tedious exercises in frustration unless you have at least level 2 hatchet durability. There's really no other meaningful way to avoid most of their attacks, which makes gameplay start to feel like a bootlegged version of Sekiro, where you just wait and parry a string, then counterattack. Rinse and repeat. The hunk fight is particularly awful because you can't even be proactive or exercise any kind of agency at all. He just parries any of your attacks, making aggression a complete non-starter. So you really are forced to simply stand there, wait and parry his attack, then get a hit in, maybe 2. This kind of puts in stark relief how excellent the RE4 Remake parry system was by comparison. Because it relied on a finite resource which the player would not always have access to, Capcom refrained from orienting boss battles entirely around parrying, save for the first Krauser fight, which was really just a prelude to a much more elaborate encounter later on. This made parries more of a situational option, something flashy which you could pull off to regain momentum, but was never mandatory. Now parries are so easy to do that Capcom has made them a pretty routine part of Leon's gameplay loop, which I think just devalues the entire mechanic. Unfortunately, the few bosses that aren't annoying Sekiro wannabes kind of just fall over without much effort. Here I am stunning Chunk easily before the fight has really even begun. He literally cannot do anything while stuck in this little intro animation. Aside from him, they're also pretty uninspired conceptually speaking. You just get a giant tarantula and a spin on Resident Evil 1's Plant 42. They're not terrible, but certainly some of the most underwhelming bosses since Resident Evil 0. On the whole, enemies are weaker than in RE4 Remake, whereas Leon's abilities have been expanded by too much, if anything. This gives his gameplay, especially in the back half of Requiem, a diluted and generally unrewarding quality. Rather than being a fun power fantasy, playing as Leon quickly started to feel like just going through the motions. At least in Leon's segments, I was also disappointed by the implementation of charms, as they don't really afford you enough agency or facilitate any interesting player choices. In most cases, they just yield objective improvements for one specific category of weapon. Here's a charm that makes your shotgun do more damage. Put it on the shotgun now. That's it. Many charms also tack on a kind of unnecessary weakness to ostensibly balance their effectiveness, or at least make using them feel like a considered player choice. The BSAA charm in particular feels worthless to me for this reason, as it requires using sniper rifles without a scope, which completely undermines their purpose. Adding insult to injury, removing the scope plagues rifles with reticle bloom, which severely hampers their accuracy much more than I think is necessary. RE4 Remake had a better approach to using rifles without scopes, letting players instead aim down the iron sights while still maintaining excellent accuracy. While I'm complaining, why did they so callously replace our old friend the Merchant with AI? I'm not saying that he absolutely must be featured in every post-RE4 Leon campaign, but there is something uniquely underwhelming about using this drab, Call of Duty-esque charisma void of a menu to upgrade my weapons. Even strictly in terms of believability, paying the Merchant or Resident Evil 8's Duke for weapons made more narrative sense to me than having these boxes apparently generate them from thin air.
What are you buying? Just something an old friend of mine used to say.
Worse yet is that rather than collecting ornate pieces of treasure and combining them to maximize funds, now Leon just picks up these sterile tracking modules. Design choices like these all just compound until everything after Rhodes Hill feels almost completely devoid of character. It's as if Capcom deliberately set out to emulate Resident Evil 4's various systems, but only in strictly utilitarian terms, without any of the charisma and artistry that made them so fun. In conclusion, I hate these stupid boxes and they can kick rocks.
My boy's a box! Damn you! A box!
All of my gameplay complaints also coincide precisely with when the story goes from pretty intriguing to laughably terrible. Past a certain point, it just devolves into little more than every character cryptically repeating proper nouns at each other.
Elpis can finally be set free.
Spencer solved that. With Elpis.
And head for Ark. Our mission is to retrieve Elpis.
What is Elpis?
They're taking Grace to Ark. The Ark will be destroyed, and Elpis will be lost forever.
What is Ark?
But you released Elpis. What is it?
When it was finally revealed what any of these words meant, the answers were just baffling and served to make every villain seem deeply stupid in hindsight.
Do you know how much time and money I wasted on this?
Much like Resident Evil 7 and Village, Requiem also suffers from some lengthy but completely unskippable sequences. These awkwardly straddle the line between gameplay and cutscene. During a first playthrough, these are tolerable, even quite entertaining at times. It's not even that I have anything against narrative-driven games which mainly involve walking around and experiencing an environment rather than engaging with complex mechanics. Those kinds of games definitely have value, though for a series like Resident Evil, which places a lot of emphasis on replayability, these bits only make going for another run much less tempting than it should be. At least Capcom has done players the courtesy of making cutscenes skippable since RE2 Remake, an option that somehow still isn't available at all for RE7, though it honestly started to feel odd a few games ago that we can't also skip the many on-rails sections, which would arguably be better served as cutscenes anyway. I also just don't care for these moments where a zombified enemy of some kind gets all up in your face and growls for too long. Honestly, they're just obnoxious. This example featuring the infected cop from Requiem's intro is especially irritating and highlights my issue so well. It obviously could just be a skippable cutscene, but Capcom insisted on including totally meaningless interactivity, such as moving the analog stick to dodge his shotgun blasts, or waving this baton around. The last part doesn't even matter. You can press nothing at all and this scene plays out identically either way. But the worst offender by far is this scenario in which you control Chloe, one of many ill-fated clones who were created for frankly incomprehensible reasons. Everything collides to make this an excruciating experience, even during a first playthrough. For starters, it's a flashback and therefore kind of lacks any urgency by definition. Players also have essentially zero agency throughout this set piece. You just wander around while Chloe whimpers, then hide under something for an agonizing amount of time when the game says to. I mean, there's not even any clever way to speed it up or go off script whatsoever. That is, aside from approaching the hatch before this one enemy has finished their little recovery animation. Capcom desperately wants you to fully experience the absolute cinema that is this flashback and will not tolerate any attempts at circumventing it. Everything happening around Chloe is also more groan-worthy than scary. Evil children with literally glowing red eyes is such a played-out cliche that I'm kind of shocked by Capcom for not having the good taste to just bin this concept altogether. Even more egregiously, we're only suffering through this sequence, which grinds the game's momentum to a complete halt because not Wesker points at a video file. Even the in-universe justification for having to put up with it is so flimsy. It reminds me a bit of the VHS tapes found throughout Resident Evil 7, though those were generally optional and still had much more engaging gameplay. It's telling that not long after release, a mod was made specifically to let players on PC skip this orphanage section and the intro altogether. It'd be highly appreciated if Capcom added an official option for this sort of thing, at least after your first playthrough. I also have some less important nitpicks which are still worth briefly going over. Why is there no field of view slider whatsoever? Every other recent entry has had one, so its omission feels pretty strange here. Obviously this is solved with mods, but that shouldn't be a necessity. Requiem does represent a significant improvement in Capcom's implementation of ray tracing, though it's not without some periodically glaring problems. There's pervasive RT noise and a splotchy, boiling effect evident in certain shadows. It's far from the worst example I've seen, but also difficult to completely ignore. Of course, I'm playing on a now decrepit RTX 3080, and therefore can't reasonably use path tracing. I don't hold this against Requiem, of course, but sometimes it becomes hard to shake the feeling that standard RT is just a shoddy compromise. This problem unfortunately becomes more pronounced once you reach Raccoon City, which already suffers from looking rather monotonous and ugly. I do appreciate ray tracing at least theoretically as a technical innovation, but in practice have yet to play any game where its implementation wasn't a mixed bag. While Requiem's RT does generally look nice enough, it also fails to change that track record. Despite so much of this game being truly phenomenal, there's more that just felt like a middling slog. In total, I could only honestly claim to have enjoyed less than half of it. That chunk of the experience, primarily in Rhodes Hill, represents precisely what I'd love to see expanded upon in future Resident Evil titles. That's all lightning in a bottle. Just fantastic. Hell, if there were an option to only play Grace's sections of the campaign, I'd personally consider that a huge upgrade. Everything else here comes across as so deeply compromised and leaves me pretty worried about the other directions which Capcom might take. This is just such a disjointed experience in total that I would struggle to recommend Requiem for somebody who hasn't bought it yet and is on the fence. It's practically begging for a more focused DLC expansion which better capitalizes on the excellent ideas established here.
Until you pin me, George, Festivus is not over.
Oh, please, somebody stop this.
Let's rumble!